Hey there, Heather. Ho there. Chip Coach. I'm loving back to the Stone Cold Hockey 1981-82 playoff. Um, Last time we talked about the 81-82 and the 91-92 seasons because they were just released by Stone Cold Hockey on June 26th. So, of course, it's June 27th when we do this. So, we had a preliminary round five matchups of teams from 1982. Philly beat Washington in five. Islanders swept Colorado. St. Louis swept Calgary. Minnesota took care of LA in six. And the Rangers took care of the Red Wings in five. And we did the game ones as Philly, Boston, Edmonton, Pittsburgh, Rangers, St. Louis, New York, and Buffalo all won their games. Now everything is random, so random opponents, random seeds. Anyway, Philly won game one. Game two saw them lose 4-2 to Chicago. Bannerman beats Pete Peters. Chicago goes by Doug Wilson, Denny Savard, Tim Higgins, and Tom Lysiak. Philly goes by Brian Prop and Bill Barber. Kitchener. Game two sees Boston, Winnipeg. Boston's now halfway home. Rogie Vachon, forgot he was with Boston at the time against Doug Sotart. Winnipeg goes by Hurchuk, their big boy, in DuPont. Boston goes by Cashman, Park, Peterson, and Cashman. If I remember correctly, wasn't 80? Yeah, this was Hurchuk's rookie campaign, was he not? Anyway, Edmonton now 2-0 up. They beat on Quebec. Lowe beats Bouchard. Quebec goes by Cote, Pichette, and Peter Stachny. Edmonton goes by Siltonen, Messier, Pat Hughes, and Dave Hunter. Not Dale Hunter, Dave Hunter. Pittsburgh beat Hartford. Now they're halfway home 4-1. Michel Dion beat the late Greg Millen. Sullivan for Hartford, but two goes by Pat Boutet, Greg Malone scoring one, and Mike Bowler, not the comedian. Rangers are now 2-0 over Minnesota. Steve Weeks beats Malash. Minnesota goes by Bobby Smith and Craig Hartsburg. Rangers goes by Ron Duguay, Barry Beck, Don Maloney. I don't know if it's the Kitchener one. There's two Maloney's. Dave Maloney's, I think. Fatoy and Maloney. Yeah, I think there's two Maloney's. Don Maloney and Dave Maloney. Fuck, how do you tell? Damn it. Because I know one's Kitchener Rangers. Vancouver beat St. Louis in overtime. Richard Brodeur beat Mike Liot. Lars Lindgren scored from Helinka and Tiger Williams. There's that Tiger Williams. Islanders win Arlo Procassion against Montreal. Danny Heron losing to Billy Smith. Montreal was up 2-0 on goals by Mario Tremblay and Brian England. Kalora and Hector Marini scoring for the Cupcakes. Then Tonelli made it 3-2. Mundu tied it. Then Thomas Johnson from Danny Ponton at 121 in overtime. And Toronto crushing Buffalo 7-3 in game two. Mario Vincent Trombley, excuse me, and Don Everett. Kitchener. Buffalo goes by Craig Ramsey, Shill Perot, finally anyone, and John Van Vaxmeer. Toronto goes by Nolan Ben, John Anderson, Rick Five, the 50-goal man, Tom Martin, John Anderson again, then Martin, then Stu Gavin. Game three, Boston wins. They're now 1 win away from taking down the 82 Jets, who pulled off one of the greatest points jumps in history. 1981, they were atrocious, winning only 9 games, and then they jumped up to, I think they jumped like 36 points or something. Didn't make the playoffs, but they still did well. Boston beats them 4-1. Rogie beats Soltart. Dave Christian, the only goal for Winnipeg. Boston goes by Ray Bork, a young Ray Bork, that is. Taz O'Reilly, Middleton, and Peter McNabb, recently deceased. Edmonton's now 3-0 in Quebec. The 82 Nordiques actually got to the conference finals against the Cupcakes by taking care of Boston and Montreal in the divisional round. This was the first year the divisional round was used, that 4 teams from each division would make it, and no matter what the points were. Edmonton beats Quebec 9-6. Fuhr beats Danny Bouchard. Gotta make sense of it. Hughes, Hunter, Dave Hunter, Callaghan, Hughes, Lumley, Curry, Messier, Gretzky, Messier. Well, a lot of points were scored. 15 goals. I'm not going to go through them all. Pittsburgh's now 3-0 on Hartford. Pittsburgh in 82. Hartford in 82 were unmemorable. Everts. Is that Hank Everts? I don't know. He beat Greg Millen. Blake Wesley scoring for Hartford. Gardner McLeish. Rick McLeish was a Penguin? Schutt, Bullard, Gatzels, and Greg Malone. Who's this Everts for Pittsburgh? I must know. Gary Everts. Oh, the snake on his thing. Helmet. No, that's Simmons. Anyway, Rangers, they are going to be 3-0 up, 5-2. Weeks beats Malash, 82 Rangers, not memorable, neither Minnesota. Minnesota goes by Sheestoff and Solheim. Solheim. Rangers goes by Dave Silk, Pavlich, Eddie Johnson, Mike Rogers, and then Mike Allison. St. Louis, Vancouver. Canucks in the shutout. Berder over Liut. Smeal, Mark Crawford. I don't think that's the same Mark Crawford, or is it? I don't know. And 2 goals by Marlene. The 82 Canucks shocked everyone by winning the Smite Division playoffs, taking care of Calgary, and then taking care of LA, who beat Edmonton in a shocker. Then they beat Chicago in the conference finals to make it to the Stanley Cup against the Cupcakes, but they lost 4 straight as per usual. Islanders are now 1 win away. They're the 82 champs in real life. They beat Montreal 5-2. Mielinson beat Heron. The future Canadiens goal is Mielinson. Montreal goes by Shet and Gainey. Islanders goals by Bossy, McEwen, Kalura, and Brett Sutter. And Mike Bossy scoring it. Buffalo beats Toronto 7-4. The 82 Leafs were terrible. They were called the worst Leafs team in history until 1985 came along. Buffalo went 7-4. Bunny LaRock, man, how can Toronto go so wrong with Bunny LaRock in the net? Losing to is it Paul Harrison, former Leaf goalie? Anyway, Leafs goals by Freiser, Rene Robert, former Sabre, coming back to Buffalo and scored 2 goals on them. Anyway, Mongrain, Dale McCourt, who scored a pair of goals, JF Sauve, Peterson, Craig Ramsey, and Rod Sealing. Kitchener! And finally, Philly shut down Chicago. 82 Blackhawks got to the Stanley Cup semifinals, but lost to the Canucks. Flyers, I don't know how they did. Peters for the shutout. Linsman, Allison, Kerr, Barber, Kitchener. Linsman, prop, and then Linsman for the hat trick. 7-0. Boston, did they sweep? They sure do. 4-1. Stankowski losing to Marco Barron. Losing Debois scored, but then Marcotte, Taz, Crowder, and McNabb scoring for Boston. And Winnipeg is done. Edmonton can't sweep. They lose 6-5. Unreal. John Garaby's run low. Edmonton goes by Siltonen, Hunter, Lumley, Coffey, Kitchener. Yes, he was a former Kitchener Ranger, and Lumley. Quebec goes by Red Kluche, Michel Goulet, Mark Tarty finally getting one. Marin Stachny with 2, and then Peter scoring the goal. Wow. Sweep of foot at Pittsburgh. They sweep Hartford. It takes overtime. Pat Price at 9:26. Well, actually, Shoot scored from Sackhouse and Boutet to tie the Dion being Millen. And then Pat Price at 9:26 from Boutet and Kehoe. I think Boutet was a former Whaler, wasn't he? But anyway, yeah, Pittsburgh sweeps Hartford aside. Didn't they have to go to the preliminaries? I don't remember. No, they didn't. I'm thinking 92, sorry. Rangers, do they sweep? No, the North Stars win. Middlebrook. Lord Lindsay Middlebrook beats Stevie Weeks. Rangers goes by Silk and Matt Clennahan, the former Miracle on Ice Man. Minnesota goes by Neil Broden, Steel Payne Palmer, and then Tom McCarthy. Rounders, do they sweep? Oh, yes, they do. They took overtime. Smith beats Walmsley. Rick Walmsley would then be traded to St. Louis in the, or is it Washington? No, he was traded to St. Louis for Doug Wickenheiser, I think. No, alongside Doug Wickenheiser. Anyway, Billy Smith. Others were up 3-0. Nystrom, McEwen, and Gillies, but then Montreal scored 3 straight goals. Mondu, and then Mark Hunter with 2. And then Mike Bossy scored his 7th from Dwayne Sutter, and Kalor. Philly crushes Chicago in the fine powder 6-1, so they are now 3-1 up. Espel losing to St. Croix. Doug Wilson for Chicago. Philly goes by Flockhart, Lunsman, Garnens, Botel, and then 2 by Reggie Leach, who finally decides to score. Vancouver is now 3-1 up on St. Louis, 6-1. Leo losing to Berdur. Fedorko getting his butt handed to him. As Boldriev, Lupo, Tiger, Smeal, and Eldebrink scoring. And that's the year after Mike Blue almost won the MVP. Buffalo beats Toronto 6-2. They're now 3-1 up. As Vincent Tremblay losing to Don Edwards, Kitchener. Maloney scoring for Toronto. Dave Maloney. Richie Dunn, Lindy Ruff. Yes, that Lindy Ruff. Mike Foligno, Van Boxmeer, and then Yvonne Lambert. Oh, Saganek scored for Toronto as well. Yvonne Lambert For 24 hours, I was more famous than the rocket. I mean, than the flower. Anyway, Philly, do they win? No, Chicago forces a game six. Espel beats Peters. Chicago goals by Wilson, Mulvey, Gardner, Douglas, and again, and then Secourt. Philly goals by Holgram, Adams. That can't be Greg Adams. Linsman and Flockhart. Edmonton takes down Quebec. Fuhrer beats Garrett. Quebec goes by Real, Peter, and Marion. Edmonton goes by Dave Hunter, Wayne Gretzky, Lee Fogelin Jr., Dave Lumley, and then Dave Hunter. Minnesota keeps it going with the Rangers to a game six. Milosh beats Weeks. They're up 3-0. Roberts, Gordy Roberts, that is. Steve Payne and Tom McCarthy scoring. They also had goals by Bobby Smith and Mike Eves. Rangers goal by Eddie Johnstone, Rudolph Leinen, and Dugai. Vancouver takes out St. Louis 5-3. Brodeur beats Liut. St. Louis's 3 goals by Brian Sutter, Clausen, and Zook. Vancouver goes by McCarthy, Gradine, Kurt Fraser, Rhoda, and Brassard. In the meantime, Toronto wins in overtime. They force a game six. Overtime heroics. Vince Trombley beats Don Everts. Buffalo tied it, but John Anderson at 9:20 in overtime from Mano and Salming doing the job. So we have 3 game sixes. Philly wins 5-3. We didn't have a game six. Yeah, we didn't have a game seven in the preliminary round, right? No, we didn't. Anyway, Philly wins 5-3. They take out Chicago. St. Croix beats Espo. Chicago goes by Hutchinson, Preston, and Crossman. Philly goes by Prop, Kerr, Clark. Bobby Clark finally scoring a goal. And then Bill Barber. Kitchener. Double digits. Rangers, Minnesota. And the Rangers win in overtime. Eddie Mio beats Milosh. Minnesota did tie it late on a Browning goal, but at 5:38, Tom Laylaw from Maloney, and it's 6-5 Rangers, and then move on to the quarterfinals. And Buffalo beats Toronto. Bunny Larac losing to Jacques Cloutier. Toronto goes by Paul Martin in McFive. Buffalo goes by Gilles Perreault, McCourt, Van Boxmeer, Andre Savarts, Jeff Sauve, and then Yvonne Lambert. 6-2. What's the clock say? 12 minutes. We'll do the quarterfinals too. So no series has ended in 7 games. Or maybe we will. Actually, we'll do 81-82 and then 91-92. We'll do both at the same time. So the quarterfinals are set. Edmonton Rangers. So it's Gretzky versus the Rangers. So his future team. Islanders Boston. That's going to be intriguing. That should have been the conference finals if it wasn't for Quebec winning in Boston in Game 7. So that's a big matchup. Pittsburgh, Vancouver. Couple of no-name teams. Vancouver, well, they get Pittsburgh and Philly, Buffalo, reviving stuff from the late 70s. So we'll see what ends up happening there. We go to the 91-92 tourney. We see the bracket for that. Buffalo took care of Philly in 7. Pittsburgh beat Chicago. It was randomly drawn, I swear. Pittsburgh beat Chicago in 7. St. Louis swept through Edmonton. Detroit took down Hartford in 6. Vancouver took down Boston in 5. Big upset there, in my mind. And Washington swept Minnesota. So we went through to the Sweet 16. Rangers, Wings, Canucks, Islanders, Jets, Kings, Habitants, and Pens won the game once. Okay, so Rangers Buffalo game 2 sees the Rangers now up 2-0. The Rangers were the President's Cup, President's Trophy champions for most points in the regular season, but they fell to Pittsburgh in the second round because Mike Richter couldn't, or was it Van Beesbrook? No, it was Richter who couldn't stop that 50-foot shot by Francis. Buffalo didn't do so well. Draper losing to Johnny Van Beesbrook. Buffalo goes by Howard Chuck, Andrechuk, and Mogilny, who's now in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Rangers goes by Nemchinov, Randy Gilhan. I forgot he was a Ranger. Nemchinov and Adam Graves. Detroit's now 2-0 up on the Sharks. Urbe losing the San Jose goes by Bruce Link Getz, who was known for his fighting, but he could still score goals, I guess, and Paul Anderson. Detroit goes by Probert, who also is known for his fist. Ysbert, Konstantinov, who was a rookie. Jimmy Carson, Yzerman, and then Bob Probert scoring twice. The Sharks expansion, this is the 92 expansion team for the Sharks, so it actually didn't do so badly. They were worse in 93. And the Red Wings in 92 came back from 3-1 down against the North Stars in the first round, but couldn't get past those pesky Blackhawks. Quebec has tied the series with Vancouver 6-3. Fusay beating Kirk McLean. Vancouver goes by Jeff Cornell, Jim Sunluck, Kitchener, and Greg Adams. Quebec goes by Herb Raglan, Mark Fortier, Olin Nolan, Claude Lapointe, Jamie Baker, and Mike Huh. Kitchener won the Memorial Cup with them. 92 Canucks fell to the Oilers in the division finals. The Nordiques were terrible. They drafted Eric Lindros, but he refused to play for such a bad organization. But Quebec City, of course, being a lot francophone, figured that Lindros didn't want to play for a French city, and all hell broke loose. Others are now 2 up on Calgary. The Flames basically threw their season away after trading Gilmore to Toronto in that 10-player deal because Gilmore hated his contract. The Islanders didn't do so much. Vernon losing to Fitzpatrick. Oh yeah, this was the year Mark Fitzpatrick won the Masterton because he had some kind of illness that limited him in '91. Calgary goes by Gary Roberts, who actually took a year off with a neck problem and came back stronger as ever. Al McInnes, Kitchener, and Sergei Makarov, who won the Calder even though he was 30 years old, but then they changed the rules. Others goes by David Folek, terrible skater, overtime hero in '93 in real life against Pittsburgh. Pierre Turgeon, who was traded from the Sabres in a massive trade, sending LaFontaine to Buffalo. Derek King, future Leaf, Ray Ferraro, and Joe Ricci. Winnipeg is now 2-0 up on Washington. The weird thing about Winnipeg and Washington is that both these teams actually blew 3-1 series leads in the first round. Well, Beauregard beats Liut. Mike Liut was trying to get his contract back. Washington got to go by Randy Burge, but Doug Evans and Pat Illionek for Winnipeg. Winnipeg choked the 3-1 series lead to the Canucks in '92. That was their second 3-1 blown lead. 1990 was their other one when they blew it to the Oilers. And the Coyotes would dumped it in '97. Washington had a 3-1 lead on Pittsburgh and choked it. I think it was '95 they also had a 3-1 series lead on Pittsburgh and choked. But nevertheless, that's what happened. The Kings now 2-0 on the Devils. You know, Wayne Gretzky, Devils have Chris Terreri. Berger, I think, played a game, didn't he, in '92? I can't remember. But yeah, Kelly Rudy doing the job. Granado, Larry Robinson, Kitchener. It's true. Look it up, people. Thomas Sundstrom and Paul Coffey, Kitchener. Yeah, Larry Robinson played for Kitchener for a few years. That's where Montreal drafted him from. And then Montreal dumped him off in '89, and LA said, let's pick him up. And LA got Paul Coffey in a trade from the Penguins. That was kind of weird how Pittsburgh would trade Paul Coffey, but they still won the Stanley Cup. Gretzky got 1 point, which is unusual. Devils goals by Dave Brown and Randy McKay. But yeah, the Kings in '92, I guess they fell to the Oilers in the first round. They did, yeah, that's right. And the Devils fell to the Rangers in Game 7, if you don't know. Montreal crushed Toronto in the fine powder 6-1. Rick Wamsley in net for the Leafs. You know what, the Gilmore trade? That was one of the other players Calgary traded to Toronto was Rick Wamsley and Jimmy McCowan. Can't remember the other two. Calgary sent to Toronto. But anyway, Patrick Waugh beats him. Peter Cecil does break Waugh's chances to go back to shout out to Kirk Bowler, Brett Gilchrist, Silva Turgeon. Big trade with the Devils of the Canadiens as the Habstead quote unquote problem child Stefan Richer to the Devils for Moeller and Turgeon. Montreal, Denny Savard, a pair of goals, and Brett Gilchrist. Montreal could have drafted Denny Savard in 1980, but they frickin' didn't, and they got him 10 years later. Yeah, the Leafs in '92 were a disaster, but that sold the seas for '93. Montreal in '92 won the first round against Hartford, a Game 7 double overtime win, and then they got swept by Boston, and Pat Burns left. St. Louis shocks Pittsburgh 5-4. Cujo beats Ken Reggett. Pittsburgh, we're up 3-0. Gordy Roberts, not Gary Roberts. Bobby and Larry Murphy scoring for Pitt. St. Louis goes by and then scored the next 4. Brett Hall with 3 and Rich Sutter with 1. So Brett Hall, and then Hall for good reason scored the game winner, his 11th. Yager for Pittsburgh. Oh yeah, Pittsburgh 92. They shocked the world. They were down 2-1 to the Rangers, and then few people could recognize that they actually didn't lose a game the rest of the playoffs. Won the next 3 from the Rangers to move on to face Boston. Swept Boston. Lemieux having that puck in fork skate and scoring the goal still. And then they swept the Blackhawks. St. Louis was up 2 games to 1 on the Blackhawks, but they choked, giving up 3 games to Chicago, who then swept both Detroit and Edmonton aside to get to the Stanley Cup Finals and got swept by Pittsburgh. How ironic. Detroit wins game 3 5-2 in San Francisco. Shovel Day beats everybody. Sunset goals by Brian Lawton, who was a #1 draft pick in 1983, but failed to live to the promise. And Mike Sullivan. Anyway, Keith Primo Gallant, Jimmy Carson, Ray Shepard, and Steve Y for the Red Wings. Vancouver is now 2-1 up, 5-2. McLean beats Jacques Cloutier. Quebec goals by Tartanoff and Joey Sakic. Remember him? Lume, Jeff Corno, Trevor Linden, Corno, and Lume for Vancouver. Calgary wins 7-3 to make sure there's at least a game 5. Fitzpatrick losing to Fernan. Calgary was up 4-0. Al McInnes, Kitchener. Theo Fleury, Kerry Wilson, and Joe Newnick scoring. Islanders goal by Derek King. Then Fleury and Makarov scored. Islanders 2 goals by Ray Ferraro, and then Gary Roberts iced it. Washington beats Winnipeg 2-1 to cut the deficit down. Beaupre beats Beauregard. Phil Sykes scoring for Winnipeg, but Pavanka and John Drews, remember him? Who was a goal scorer in the 1990 Capitals run to the conference finals, but they failed because Cicerelli got hurt. Devils win in overtime, make sure LA loses the game. Billington beats Rudy. Claude Lemieux, the hero again, Wachowski, and the pride of Haiti, Clyde Philgrain with a assist. Montreal shuts out Toronto. Andre Red Light Rasico beats Fuhr. Carbonneau and Key scoring the goals. You know you fucked up when Andre Red Light Rasico beats you and shuts you out. Toronto's just not ready for prime time. Pittsburgh wins in overtime against St. Louis. Hebert lost to Reggett. Mario Lemieux his 7 from Stevens and Troy Loney. And Buffalo beats the Rangers to cut that down to 2-1. Pupa beats Mikey Richter. Rangers goals by Messi and Nemchinov. Odette, Snuggerud, and Odette for the Sabres. We only have 2 teams that could sweep. Detroit swept the expansion Sharks. Shovel Day beats Malaise. Sunset was up 2-0. Ken Hammond and Paul Fenton. I think I've covered the Sharks. Yeah, Ken Hammond, especially Fenton. Pat Falloon scoring for the Sharks, but Detroit goals by Carson, Gallant, Jesper, and Sean Burr. Montreal, do they sweep? Yes, they do. In overtime. As Watt beats Fuhr. Toronto's up 4-2 on goals by Anderson, Guy LaRose, Gilmore, and then LaRose again. Montreal got goals by Gilbert Dion, Kitchener, Danny Savard, and then Dion again, Kitchener. Mike McPhee in the last minute, tying the game, and then in overtime at 2:22, Mike Keane from Russ Corno, game set match. Leafs are out. Well, I can't complain. This time. Rangers beat Buffalo, they're 1-1 away. Von Beesbrook beats Pupa. Buffalo's 3 goals, Ramsey, Hawerchuk, and Andrzejczyk. Rangers go by Tony Amonte, soon to be a Blackhawk a couple years later. Paul Broaden, forgot about him. Chris King, who was known for his fist. John Agrodnik, then Amonte again, and Adam Graves. Vancouver wins on prolongation, so they're up 3-1. John Tanner losing to Kirk McLean. Quebec goals by Doug Smale, who they picked up from Winnipeg. Olin Nolan, Greg Paslowski, and Wayne Van Dorp. I thought he retired. Vancouver goes by Lume, Jeff Corno, Murison, Adams, and Cliff Ronning. Islanders beat Calgary. They're now up 3-1, 7-2. Fitzpatrick over Fernan. Calgary goes by Ronnie Stern and Gary Lehman, who the Leafs traded away to Calgary for Gilmore. Islanders goes by Rob DeMaio, Ferraro, Hubie McDonough, Steve Thomas, Ray Ferraro with a hat trick, and then a 4th goal for good measure. So Ray Ferraro doing that. Winnipeg wins 5-3. They're now 1-1 away as Beauregard beats Beaupre. Beware that 3-0 lead. 3-1 lead. Winnipeg goals by Housley, Newman, Hartman, Osborne, and Russ Rumiak, that is. Everyone except for Housley scored the first goals. Washington goes by Ridley, Dino, and Callie Johansson. LA wins in overtime. They're up 3-1. Steve Weeks beats Chris Terreri. Mike Donnelly, the hero, with his 3rd Robitaille with assist. Pittsburgh wins on the prolongation, so every series is 3-1 except for the 2 sweeps. Pittsburgh wins. Lemieux from Loney at 6-1. Brazil beats Cujo. Rangers, do they win in 5? Yes, they do. 4-3. Richter beats Malarchuk. Buffalo goes by Mogilny, Odette, and Hawerchuk. Ranger goes by Messier, Tim Kerr. Remember, he was a Ranger. Jan Eriksson finally scoring a goal. And Mike Gardner. There's the goal scorer we all know and love. while Keenan doesn't love him. Vancouver does their job in 5 against Quebec, 5-2. McLean beats Vissé. Sundin and Nolan scoring for Quebec. Future Leafs. Vancouver goes by Lume, Mamessel. Sergio Mamessel with a hat trick. He's a goon. And Lume scoring. Well, shows how much I know. Calgary beats the Islanders to force a game 6 back home. Vernon beats Healy. Islander goes by Derek King with the hat trick. Thomas and Ferraro. Calgary goes by Makarov, Reichel, Newendike, Roberts, McInnes. Kitchener. I know we're running out of time. Game 5, Washington beats Winnipeg. Leo with the shutout. Cicerelli and I are afraid he's scoring, but Winnipeg does go home with a chance to win. New Jersey goes to LA, wins 3-1 to force a game 6 back home. Terrari beats Rudy. Claude Lemieux, Seager, and Salapukin. Yari Curry for LA. And St. Louis wins 6-2 to force at game 6. Brasso losing to Cujo. Pitt goals by Larry Murphy and Kevin Stevens. St. Louis goals Paul Cavallini, Shanahan, Cavallini, Emerson, Brett Hall. Islanders, Islanders will lose. We got a game 7. Calgary with a shutout. Ferdinand over Fitzpatrick. Roberts, Fury, Ranheim, Reichel, and Mark Hapshot scoring the goals for the Flames. So Islanders, Flames, game 7 coming up soon. Washington wins. They force at game 7. Yeah, so Calgary was down 3-1. Now they force at game 7. Washington does the same to Winnipeg. Leo over Essensa. Elliott for Winnipeg. Burridge and Iafredi for Washington. LA wins in overtime over New Jersey. Kudelski from Gretzky at 2:45. Rudy beats Terrari. So the Kings are going to the quarterfinals. And Pittsburgh wins on the percussion over St. Louis. Brasso beats Guy Hebert. At 5:24, Mullen from Yager and Tocchet. I forgot they had Rick Tocchet. 2 game 7s, Calgary and the Islanders. Mike Vernon versus Glenn Healy. We got Fitzpatrick, Steve Weeks, and Danny Lorenz. The Islanders, Bullies Flames. Vernon, Jeff Reese, Rick Wamsley, Trevor Kidd, and Scott Sharples. Well, Jeff Reese, they picked up from the Leafs for Rick Wamsley. Ezekiel Roberts, Theo Fleury, Sergei Makarov, Joe Nunez, Al McInnes, Kitchener, Robert Reichel, Joe Otto, Gary Sutter, great player. Mark Habshot still around. Michel Petit still around. Gary Lehman, part of that deal. Craig Berube traded from the Leafs to the Flames. Tim Hunter being a goon. Islanders, Ray Ferraro, Derek King, Pierre Turgeon, Van Hogue, big trade between the Sabres and Islanders. David Folek, the slow guy on ice. Adam Creighton was an Islander. I didn't know that. Tom Curvers. Leaf fans hate that name because they wanted Curvers so badly they traded their first round pick to the Devils for him, and that first round pick became Scotty Niedermayer. Pat Flatley, Lord of the Dance. Dave McElwain, who played for 4 teams in the same year. Uwe Krupp, who would later become a Colorado icon. Tom Fitzgerald. Bill Berg. A lot of future Leafs. Robbie DeMaio. Joe Ricci. Daniel Merriwell, former Leaf. Reggie Pilon. And Mick Fukuda. So because of time constraints, we have to auto finish, and game 7 ends up being a win for the Flames. So the Flames come back from 3-1 down, and the Islanders fucked it up. Vernon beats Healy. Islander goes by Riki and Derek King. Calgary goes by Fleury, Makarov, Kerry Wilson, Roberts, and Michel Petit finally scoring a goal. Of course, he was one of the players the Leafs traded to the Flames. Winnipeg, Washington, game 7 sees Don Beaupre and Stefan Beauregard going head-to-head. Essensa, the main goalie for Winnipeg. Tabarachi, the backup. I'm surprised he's not there, but Beauregard and Mike O'Neill. Winnipeg would trade Beauregard to Buffalo. To Buffalo, who then would trade him to Chicago for Dominic Hasek. Washington, Beaupre with Mike Liu and Jim Harnavac. Sounds like a golfer. The backups, Eddie Olczyk still around, Pat Elliott, Phil Helsley, good defenseman Freddie Olsen. Troy Murray going back to Winnipeg after leaving Chicago. Darren Shandon, Nagoon, Thomas Dean playing a great year for Winnipeg, great career. Stu Barnes, Stanton Cole on that team, Temple Newman, Mark Osborne, Super Mark Osborne, Aaron Broaden, Mike Hartman, Davidoff, Keith Kachuk, he was just a freshman rookie, Russ Romanek, Randy Carlisle, a great defenseman with no lid. Dino Cesarelli, Dimitri Kristrix, Mike Wrigley, Dale Hunter, Boo Hiss, Peter Bondra, Pavanka, John Druce, Kevin Hatcher, Io Frady, Kelly Johansson, Simon Cote, Nick Kyrgios was on that team. Ron Langway also played defenseman without a helmet. Vlad Schlegel. I don't think he was a Kitchener Ranger. And we have a winner for Winnipeg. So Winnipeg does not blow the 3-1 series lead. Beauregard beats Beaupre. Washington goes by Kelly Johansson and Cicerelli. But Olsen, Elinek, and Ochak scoring for Winnipeg. So what does this mean? A quarterfinals between Pittsburgh and Calgary. So it's basically Lemieux versus McGinnis. Rangers, Detroit, battle original six teams. They're not really rivals, but they're original six and all that. Vancouver, LA, a great battle in the Pacific. And Winnipeg has to face Montreal. So it's an all Canadian quarterfinal. Well, that's what I like, an all Canadian matchup to get the Canadian blood boiling. So anyway, that's all I've got. So thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.